Hello there, I'm Jimmy Vegas, and in this series we're going to create a cool little quiz app that you can use for mobile devices or PC, depending on your preference, or both if you want to. So we'll be designing and building a fully fledged quiz app using a couple of different aspects within Unity itself. We're bringing in a couple of other things as well to make it more interactive. So the first question is, how much knowledge do you already have of Unity? If it's a lot, you'll find this series very easy. If it is absolutely no knowledge at all, don't worry, because we'll be going from a very, very simple level up to, I'd say, an intermediate level in both design and programming. So we'll be able to put this on mobile devices and, like I say, PC as well. So everything you create within Unity can be ported to any supported device, whether that's an Android device, PC, Mac, Linux, Apple devices. You can do it all inside Unity as long as it is supported, even consoles. So it is designed with you, the viewer, in mind. And the great thing is, as I said earlier, you don't need any prior knowledge in Unity or programming to get started with this series. I will be teaching it all to you step by step. So, like I say, the aim is to get from absolute beginners to some kind of intermediate level. And throughout the series, if you want to see anything in particular, just drop a comment below in one of the videos. Or if you're watching this in the full version, just still drop a comment in the video if you want to. So all programming will be done with C#. Finally, before we get into it, this series will work in all versions of Unity as long as you're using something from at least 2015. And I realise that's a long time ago now, but some menus may look a little different if you're using a version different to me, but essentially everything will still function the same. So currently, as of recording this series, I'm using version 2020. By the time you see this, 21 could be out, 22 could be out. You might feel more comfortable working on 2018 or something like that. But either way, it will function pretty much the same. So let's get to grips with what we have here. Now, if you install Unity for the first time, you will more than likely install something called the Unity Hub, and that is this window that we have right in front of us. And we have four little options here. The two that we're going to be using in this tutorial is the installs and projects. So if you click on installs and don't see anything here at all, you would need to click on add, and it will give you a list of the latest official releases as well as pre-releases. And you can see here the latest official release for me is 2020.2. The latest pre-release is 2021.1. I would generally recommend avoiding pre-releases simply because they could be filled with bugs, they could cause issues or things like that. The official releases are the ones that have been tested and are going to be the most stable ones to use. I would recommend using at least 2018. Although I did say something from 2015, for example, Unity 5, I would ultimately recommend 2018 to 2020 at this point. Obviously, new versions come out all the time, but everything will still function as normal. So once you have selected whatever version you want to install and clicked next, you'll be able to add the modules. So these modules represent what platforms you can build to. So for example, we want to build for iOS, or we want to build for UWP, or we want to build for Android. Just make sure they are selected. Then click done. And it may take a little bit of time, but it will install on your machine. And you'll end up with one of these little windows right here. Next thing we need to do is create a new project. So if we go to the projects, you can see I already have many projects here. All we need to do is click the arrow on new and select whatever platform you want to build for. So in this case, we have this little window pop up right here. Project name, obviously call the project whatever you want to call it, quiz app, whatever. Select the location, and you can also select the template. Now the template just basically defines whatever render engine we're using. So for example, there are three render engines within Unity currently. There is the 3D, there is HDRP, and URP. The URP also used to be known as LWRP. We're going to be using 3D because we're not going for anything quite strenuous here. There's no point delving into the HDRP, which is the high definition render pipeline, just simply because there's no use for it in what we're creating. Now, we are going to go in 3D with this because we are going to use the 3D environment a little later on in this series. We're not going to do this entirely in 2D. Although most of the project will be in 2D, we are going to deal with 3D as well. So once you have 3D selected, Click on Create. Everything should disappear and you'll be presented with something that looks a little bit like this. This is the default layout of Unity. It will look familiar to some people who have used various other aspects. Maybe you've used CryEngine, maybe you've used Blender, 3D Studio Max. It will look somewhat familiar. So we're going to go through each section here and a quick rundown of what it's for, what it does, and how it will be used in this series. So over here we have the hierarchy. The hierarchy is a great way of storing items with a name. So for example, I can select the main camera or directional light and you'll see them highlight over here in the scene. Basically, a way of putting the hierarchy is saying it's a list of all our objects in the scene. What is the scene? The scene is where we store all those objects visually, and as you can see, if I select the directional light, we can see there it is. There is not a physical representation of every single object in the scene view. For example, like I say, camera, light, we don't physically see them, but we know they are there. If I were to double click on directional light, we would kind of focus on it a little bit. And to get more perspective on that, we can use the mouse wheel to zoom in, zoom out. And if we use the left mouse button, we can click on objects inside the scene, like so. If we hold down the right mouse button, we can pan around like so. We could also use the directional keys on the keyboard to move around as well. So you get your fingers quick and nimble and everything. You can actually just whiz around in the scene view quite quick. It may take a little bit of practice and getting used to, but once you're used to it and how you can operate inside the scene view, you can actually do things real quick. So moving on, we next have the game view. The game view is a way of seeing and playing the game that we have built in the scene view. So for example, if we had created a little scene with a guy that's running and we can control him, we would press play up here and we'd be able to physically play that inside the Unity engine. Next, we have the animator. Now the animator is not going to be important right now. It's basically a way of, you could think of it as a way of containing all of animations that are relatable to one object. So if we had a cube that had an animation where it spins around, you would end up storing the animation inside here, the animator. Over here we have the inspector panel. So if I click the main camera, you'll see that we have all of these details up here. Each object will have at least one component. And you can see here that these are known as components. So the camera is a component, transform is a component, and we can also add components if we need to as well. You see a massive list of different components to add. A component is basically a way of feeding information to any object. So for example, if we had a cube that had a collider, it would have a collider component, and we could tell it how big that collider was, how small it was, whether it would be a trigger or not. But I did say each one has at least one component, and that one component is the transform component. Each object has to have a physical position somewhere. It has to have a physical rotation value and a physical scale value. Even if it is 0, 0, 0, it still has to have that value in existence within Unity. So the inspector panel, in short terms, is just a way of defining various different aspects of every single object within development. We have a navigation tab here. You may have that, you may not. We won't be using anything to do with navigation in this series. Basically, it's just artificial intelligence to a degree. That's all. So down the bottom, we have the project window, and this is where we can store all of our assets. Things like sounds, things like textures, things like models, materials, scripts, anything you can think of that you would create a game with would be considered an asset, and we'd be able to see it down here in this window. Next, we have the console. The console is a great way of seeing, for example, if you've created a script, you have an error, the game won't run. The console will help you find where that error is, and you can track it down and hopefully fix it. Next, we have animation. Now, this is another tab that you may or may not have. It just depends on your Unity setup. If you do not have this animation tab, let's get this in place now. You can click these three little dots here, and then you'll be able to click on Add Tab, and then finally Animation, and it will bring up this tab right here. This is a way of creating simple animations inside Unity. It's not recommended to have big complex animations, for example characters, developed inside Unity, they're usually created inside 3D modeling apps. So if you created a character in 3D Studio Max, you would create the animation there as well, rather than in Unity. But that doesn't mean to say that you can't create animations in Unity, because you can, and we will be doing in this series for whatever reason a little later on. But it's just a simple way of doing it. And to be honest, they can be quite complex sometimes. You can create good animations. It just depends on your patience and skill, really. So that's pretty much all of the windows that we're going to be using within this series. And the great thing is we can actually move these around. If you're not happy with how it looks currently, the layout, you can move them around. So let's take this game view and let's place it over here with the inspector, just because we could if we wanted to. So you can switch it around. Let's bring it back over here. And let's bring the hierarchy over here. Like that. So all I'm really doing there is holding the left mouse button down on whatever tab I want to move, moving it to where I want to move it to, and then letting go. We can also uncouple tabs from their places. So if we want to make the game tab its own individual object, we can just uncouple it and wait until it's a window that you can move around and then let go. And now it's its own window. Nice and easy. So let's place this back here. And now what I'm thinking is, because we're aiming, I think, primarily for mobile devices, what we'll do is we will manipulate this a little more to be mobile shaped. So most games that you would find on your phone or mobile devices are in portrait mode. So we can bring this game view here and place it there. So now we have the game, scene, and hierarchy. And we can expand these a little bit if we want to, like so. You can even bring this up or down, however you want to visualize it, I guess. So you can see here, I think this is a pretty decent look for how we're going for. I mean, I said earlier, this can be used for PC as well. I think realistically, everything we create in Unity is going to be for PC one way or another. But everything you do here will be relevant to all devices. Speaking of devices, how do we make sure that we are porting it to the correct device? Well, if we go to File, and if we go to Build Settings, we can see here we have all the supported devices currently. So most people develop for PC, Mac, and Linux. Some people develop for UWP. Some people iOS, Android, whatever you want. Now, the key to all of this is, if you have a massive game, the earlier you switch platform, the quicker it will change over to that supported platform. Although in this case, it's not going to matter too much. If you have a massive open world game and you've fully developed that, it's massive, and then you try switching platform, it could take a while to switch over to that platform. For now, I'm going to go with Android. If you want to go for something else, it's entirely up to you. But let's switch platform. It will take just a second to switch over because it is a very, very small project file right now. It shouldn't take much more than 20 seconds, I don't think. But like I say, you can switch platform at any point during development, and you can always switch back at any point as well. There's no restriction on when you do that. It's just a case of remembering that if it's a large project, it could take longer than a considerably smaller project. So we've converted it now, and you can see this little Unity icon represents what platform we're currently building for. In this case, Android. So once you've got your platform set, let's take a look at a couple of other things. So Unity is mainly object-oriented, but that doesn't mean to say there isn't just as much coding, because there really is. You can't really make a game without coding. Yes, I know there are ways, there are different things you can get, but to me, I've always considered cheating to be a little bit naughty. I prefer coding, I prefer learning. Yeah, it may be the harder, longer way sometimes, but at the end of it, you've learned a lot more than you would have if you've just got a program which makes the game for you. So, because we're going to be dealing a lot with UI in this particular series, what we're going to do is we're going to add in a UI element that we're going to use in the next tutorial. So if we go to Game Object, you can see all the different objects that you'll be able to insert into Unity. As I said, because we're dealing with UI, this UI right here is going to be one that we'll deal with. So let's start by inserting an image. So click, and you'll see a couple of things appear on the screen. Firstly, we'll see this big white square in the scene view, and it'll also appear here in the game view. You'll notice at the moment this is appearing on the right hand side and this one's appearing on the left hand side. That means that we need to switch around how we're viewing this. So we're currently viewing this backwards. So if we were to pan our camera around with the right mouse button and then hold the middle mouse wheel and pan ourselves across and then pan ourselves around again with the right mouse button, we can see this is now our screen of what we're going to see. So this white line is the canvas, and you'll see that that's appeared here as well as event system. Don't need to worry about event system just for now, but the canvas is the primary object we're going to be dealing with. The canvas is a way of storing everything UI-wise inside Unity. So if we've got text appearing on screen, if we've got pictures appearing on screen, buttons, all that kind of thing, it will be inside the canvas. So that is our first object inside Unity, and if I click it, you can see that there are a couple of different components here. Again, we have a transform component because it needs to know where it is. We have a couple of others as well. So before we end this, let's figure out how we save the scene. Now, by default, Unity will present to you this, which is the default scene, known as sample scene. And it's up to you how you want to deal with this. Let's go to File, and we'll go to Save As, and let's go into Scenes, and we'll put this down as Quiz Scene, and let's hit Save. So check at the top now that yours does indeed say Quiz Scene, and then make sure you select the sample scene, and let's hit Delete, and it's gone for good. So the only scene we're now dealing with is quiz scene, which is this one right here. You will have noticed that we now have this little window right here. And all we're going to do is just drag and drop this image into Unity. So whatever image you have as a background, whether it's an image you've taken, an image you've Google searched, wherever you want, you can just drag and drop and place in Unity like so. Make sure that if you do drag and drop anything, you have to make sure that it's not inside a zipped folder. It won't actually come into Unity if it is not unzipped. Anyway, we now have it in Unity, and this is now part of our asset. So it's an actual asset. Now, we're going to create another folder here just so we can store the assets for textures in a separate place rather than in scenes, because you can see it is in scenes, and if we click in assets, it's not there. It's always good practice to keep everything neat and tidy when you're developing. So here in the assets, let's right click, create folder, and let's call this textures. And now let's go into that folder. It is indeed empty. And now let's drag and drop that select background into textures. You'll see it's moved into there. Like I say, it's always good practice to keep things neat and tidy. So what can we do with this? Well, we want to make a background to this game. We don't want it to be, that default skybox from Unity. You see that in so many different games. We don't really want that. You could use a skybox if you wanted to. Again, it's entirely up to you how you want to do this. You could get a skybox from the asset store. If you don't understand what a skybox is, I have plenty of tutorials on stuff like that. If you want a quick pause and head over there and have a quick search for skyboxes, it's up to you. But I'm just going to use this background, like I say. So what do we do with this? Well, we can either attach it to a raw image as it is, or we can change it to a sprite and attach it to an image. You may have noticed that when we go to Game Object UI, when we clicked image, we also have raw image. There is a difference between the two. Raw image, you can attach an actual texture to, so for example, a PNG or a JPEG. An image, it has to be a sprite. So let's change this to a sprite now and see how it works. So if we select this texture and head over here where it says texture type, we can actually drop down there and change to 2D and UI, which is known as a sprite. Click and then click on apply. It'll take just a second to convert it to a sprite, but that doesn't really matter too much for us. So remember that image that we introduced to our scene last time? let's make that into our background. Many different ways you can create a background here. You can have it huge and just have a little portion of this texture as the background, or you can have it stretched across the entire screen. Let's work with a couple of different ways and see what we think fits best. So next thing you need to do is make sure you do have that image selected in your hierarchy, and then drag and drop this texture over here onto Sprite. And you can see it does change right there. Looks kind of funky, looks kind of cool, but it's not really background material right now, is it? It's just a little square down the bottom. Well, that's where anchoring and resizing comes in. So if we click here, this is the anchor presets, and we can change it. We have all different sections that we can choose from. We can stretch it across the scene. We can stretch it all the way in both directions. We can place it at certain locations. Best thing to do, I would say, is either, at this point, keep it central or stretch it across your entire scene, or screen, I should say. So I'm going to keep it in the middle for now. I'm going to place it in 0, 0 position, so it's center screen. And then I'm going to change the size of it so as it's huge on the screen. But remember, this is what it will look like within our game. So if we put this, for example, as 250 by, let's say, 1000, we can see it looks a little crazy. But you can see here it goes outside the boundaries of the canvas. This means it will never be seen on the actual screen itself when the game is played. So if we set the width as 1000 as well, that is our background. Now, as I say, there's always different ways that you can play around with how this looks. For now, I'm going to keep it just like that, because for the next tutorial, we're going to do a little bit of coding and play around with it even more. But for now, let's keep it like that. Let's play around with the color and see what we can come up with. So obviously this image by default is red and black, but you can change a couple of things by going to the color section right here. And you could change it all completely black like so, play around, make it darker. You can play around with the alpha if you want to and make it kind of see-through. I guess it just depends how you want your game to look. I mean, the kind of effects that you can achieve will become more apparent as the series goes on. But for now, I'm going to keep the alpha as full 255. But what I might do is reduce the intensity of it down to about there. So you can see the red is not quite as intense, and it's probably worth playing around with some of these settings to see what you can come up with when it comes to the visuals. So what else do we need here? Well, like I say, this is a quiz app, so we're going to need some text on screen to tell us or ask us a question. So let's go to Game Object, let's go to UI, and let's go to Text. Now, when we click it, we'll see, we can just about see it here, and it's not very great, is it, right now? We can manipulate this once again to kind of reflect what we're aiming for here. First and foremost, I think we need to set the text as white so we can see it a little better. So let's go over to the color here, and let's change it to white. Much more visible now. Let's make it a little larger because it's very small. It's going to be hard to read on, for example, a phone screen. So let's change the font size to, let's change it to 40. You'll notice it disappears. The reason it disappears is because the size of the text box here is too small for the actual size of the font or the text. So we need to resize this. This is where the rect tool up here comes in very handy. This rect tool is basically a bit like a selection, but you can resize it. So if we select it and make sure we have the text selected, we can see that each corner has the ability to move it outwards, and each line we can move in whatever direction we see fit. So if we want to bring it this way, we can. If we want to bring it this way, we can. And let's bring it downwards so we can see. Now, we have to kind of plan ahead a little bit here because we've got to think how much text is going to fit into this text box. This is going to be the question. So, for example, how much wood could a woodchuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? Now, I know that sounds utterly crazy. That is a tongue twister. But the general idea is that is a fairly long question. It's always good to kind of look at it yourself and realize what kind of questions you're aiming for here. Are there going to be any really long-winded questions? And if there are, you would need to adjust the size of your text box accordingly. So what we're going to do now is, while still having the rect tool selected and the text box selected, let's drag this object up here. Now, I've just used the left mouse button, and you'll notice that if I slightly move it this way, it will snap to the center and we'll see a blue line down the middle. That means that it is now centered. That text is centered in the screen. Obviously not in middle directly, because that is the middle there, but we could always move it to the middle, and you could see the two blue lines indicate that that is the direct middle of the screen. But I want it somewhere up the top, because we're going to have the answers in little boxes down here. Now, this means that we do need to increase this a little more. Does it mean our font is a little too big? I think it could do. So let's reduce the font just slightly. Let's have it as 34. And I'm going to stretch this out just a tad more on both sides to probably about there. That looks like it should do. So now we have all this space here if our question goes on a lot longer than how much wood could a woodchuck chuck if woodchuck could chuck wood. So realistically, how far are your questions going to go? Are they really going to go that long? Best to kind of work that in now, earlier rather than later, just in case you put, you know, a question mark box, you know what I mean, a box here somewhere, an answer box. Also worth noting that I do want some visualizations within this game as well. So when we come to, like, one of the questions that we're probably going to do is we're going to have the Mario question mark block, and we're going to have which series does this block come from, and we're going to have that like in the middle at some point. So we kind of want to make space just in case. So we can probably move this up a little more to about there, I think. And obviously we want to have a score up here later on as well. But for now, I think that is good placement for that text box. So what we're going to do next, let's add in those answer buttons. So let's go to Game Object, let's go to UI, and let's go to button right there. You can see, nice and easy. And we can move it down just like we have previously to about there. And one thing I will say at this point, we are aiming for mobile devices first and foremost. The great thing about buttons in Unity is they are already pre-programmed to work with a touchscreen. So we don't need to do anything extra to make a button work on a touchscreen. So let's increase the size a little bit. In fact, let's bring it down the bottom of the screen first, and let's increase the size to about there. And then I'm going to now make sure I do have that button selected. I'm going to hold Control on the keyboard and press D. That will duplicate the object. So we now have two of those buttons, one on top of the other. And we can drag that second one out to about there. And now you can see there's two of our answers. And I'm sure you can guess what we're going to do next. We're going to duplicate the button once again. And let's zoom in a little bit. And let's bring the button to about there. And then let's duplicate that one and bring that across to there. So as quickly as that, you can see how this quiz app is now forming. We have the basic visualization of how it's going to look in place. And so far, so good. Now, the key to this at the moment is naming things correctly. So what I think we need to do is name a couple of things here a bit more accurately. I'll leave image as image for the background. This text, let's press F2, or you can right click and rename. It's up to you. And let's call this question text. And now let's name all of these buttons. So I want to get them in order. I want this one to be A, this one to be B, this one to be C, this one to be D. So let's arrange these in the correct order. Currently, button is C. Button 1 is D. Button 2 is A. And button 3 is B. So this one goes up here. And this one goes up here. And all I've done there is hold the left mouse button and drag objects around to rearrange them in the hierarchy. So you can see this one is going to be answer A. This one, answer B. This one, answer C. And finally, yeah, you've guessed it, answer D. Now, each of these answer buttons say button as the text. Where exactly do we change that? You'll notice these little arrows next to each of the buttons. And if we click it, we can see another object attached to it, which is called text. And that is right there. Now, obviously, this is going to be dynamic, and we're going to change some of this later on in the series. And obviously, it's not all just going to say button. But for now, we'll just put A with a space. And then we'll go to the next one once again. And then we'll say B. And then we'll do this one, which is C. And finally, D. So here, text and D. So already, like I said earlier, you can see the shape of this app now taking place. And I think at some point you'll probably see all of this come together and it will make so much more sense than it probably does right now. But there are a couple of things that I really want to get into place to make it a bit more worth it. If we press play, for example, now, it looks like nothing is changing here at all. But we are now physically in play mode, and you can tell that if you move the mouse over the buttons and try clicking them, they will actually do something. They'll highlight, they'll move a little bit, but nothing is actually linked to them, so they won't physically do anything to the game. We obviously have to code that, and coding can be a little, not difficult, but daunting for new people. Before we end this tutorial, these buttons work the same way as the text does. So if you click on the text on the buttons, we can change what color they are. We can change, or rather the text at least, if we click on text, we can change the size of it. This comes down to, again, what's the longest answer you could possibly have. So if we have answer A as, gosh, I'm not sure, what's a really, really, really long word that probably would fit in this box? Let's have, how much wood could a woodchuck chuck of woodchuck could it wood? Let's put lots and lots of wood. So I think that's pretty decent. That should actually do. So that's going to be probably the longest answer we could have, which is quite a lot of characters. So I don't think we need to worry too much about the size here. So I want to start with the C# programming first and foremost. I know a lot of people like me kind of want to just get straight into programming, but there is a lot to learn for new people to programming, but it's not complicated. I think the sooner we get it out the way, the better in many, many ways. So firstly, let's create a new folder specifically for any scripts that we create. So make sure we're in the assets section down here, right click, create folder. We'll call this scripts. Let's head inside there and let's create a new C# script. So we can right click, create, and click on C# script. And now it is important what you name your script at this point. I'll explain why when we have the script open. So this script is going to be to rotate the background of our game. So that red background that we've got, I want it to kind of rotate very slowly, just to give it a bit of visualization more than anything. So the script is going to do that. So let's call this rotation background. And then let's open that up in Visual Studio. So all you need to do is either double click or hit return, and it will start up Visual Studio. Now, obviously, your version may differ from mine. You may want to use something different to do your programming in. Visual Studio does come bundled with Unity in a nice, easy sense, so that's probably by default the easiest one to use. I find it very useful as well, and it's also very handy for tracking down errors as well as using the console in Unity itself. So when the script is loaded, by default it will look a little like this, and this is just a standard default script. Any script you create within Unity will have this standard layout. Now there's a couple of things on here which may confuse people, a couple of things which may be a bit peculiar, but don't worry about them. First three lines we have here, this is the namespace. So a quick and easy way of thinking about this is a way for the script to recognize where to pull information from to understand the code. So for example, if we were to use some kind of UI elements within this, we'd need to add in a line in the namespace so the script recognizes any UI lines of code. Now the public class is rotation background. And as I said, this has to be identical to the name of your script. So if you've called your script Mr. Willy Wonka for some random reason, then the public class name would also have to be Mr. Willy Wonka. It has to be the exact same. If it isn't, the script will not work correctly. Further down, we have an open curly bracket, and if you follow the trail down, you'll see we have a closed curly bracket. This dictates that everything in here is an enclosed section. You notice these little sections also have a start and an end. So these are known as methods. Now a method can come in multiple different ways. The two that it gives us is void start and void update. Void start is run once, and that is when the script loads. So for example, if this script is attached to an object in Unity, that object is turned on. Whatever is in void start will run once, and that's it. Void update is called once per frame, as it says just above it. And that means that it constantly runs while the script is active. So if the script is turned off, it will not run. But if it's turned on, it will run constantly. The green lines are known as annotations, and they aren't really lines of code. They are just ways of, you can think of it as putting notes on the script. So if you want something, if you've got a really complicated script and you want people to understand what it's doing, you could put annotations, which is dictated by a double slash. And then you can put whatever you want after that. And that line of code will never be run. It's just there as a note. So what are we going to do with this script? Well, as we said, we're going to rotate the background of our game. And to do that, we need to add in a variable. Now, a variable is a way of storing information in the script, and that can be in almost any type of form. So you could have a whole number, which would be an integer. You could have a decimal number, which would be a float. You could have a Boolean, which is true or false. You can have game objects. You can have audio. You can have tons of different types of variables. So because this is our first script, we're going to stay fairly simple, and we're just going to have a float, which is a decimal number. And we're going to be dealing inside the update method. So we can actually get rid of the annotations, and we can get rid of the void start method because we don't actually need them in this script. So we can select them and hit delete. So how do we declare a variable? Well, easiest way is to just say before void update, but after the open curly bracket for the class, we can say public, and then we declare what type of variable it's going to be. And as I said, it's going to be a float. So float, which is the decimal number. And then we can call this anything we want, as long as it's not something silly related to the script. So for example, we couldn't call this rotation background. It'd be a bit daft. Just be sensible when naming things, as long as they're not the same as a method or a class or anything like that. So we're going to call this rotate speed, and we're going to make it equal to 1 with a semicolon. Now, what I've done here is I've said that the variable is called rotate speed, and it's a decimal number, but I haven't declared the decimal. Don't need to worry about that because a float can deal with both whole numbers and decimal numbers. And we've said it is equal to 1, and then we've ended it with a semicolon. That semicolon is a way of the script understanding that this is the end of this line of code. Please move on to the next one. So it would do. It would follow it down until it found another line of code it would understand. In this case, the update method, and then it would start that update method. So we would need to tell it, what do we do here? Well, the way we've got to look at it is, how are we actually going to rotate what we want to rotate? Well, there are a couple of different ways. We could define the other object that we're rotating, which is the background, as a variable, but the best way to do it is to probably say this dot transform dot rotate. Now you'll notice at this point a couple of things are looking a bit strange. This is highlighted in a kind of purpley colour, but the other words are not. Don't worry about this too much, but one thing that is important is the capitalization. You'll notice that this and transform are not capitalized, however, rotate is. You can usually find out which one is relevant by looking at the components, but in most cases, when using something like Visual Studio, it will tell you what you need to do. So we're going to rotate this on the Z or Z axis. So if we open curly bracket, we now have the opportunity to put an X number, a Y number, and a Z number. And the way this works is we can rotate on either the X axis, Y axis, or the Z axis. Obviously, the red one is the X, green one is the Y, and the blue one is the Z. So we don't want to rotate on X, so we can put 0. We don't want to rotate on Y, so put 0. But we do want to rotate on the Z or Z. And we can actually put, instead of a number in here, rotate speed. And then comma. And then we also need to put in here space dot world. And then close bracket and semicolon. So let's quickly recap what we've done here. This script is going to tell whatever object it's attached to. So this object that it's attached to, it's telling it to transform, and we want it to rotate. And we want it to rotate every frame, which is what the void update does. Nothing on the X, nothing on the Y, but whatever is in the variable known as rotate speed, that's what we want it to rotate by every frame. And space.world is a way of telling it to do it relative to the world around it. It's always wise to have something like this, because if your world changes, or there could be a multitude of factors which could affect this, but making this rotation relative to the world around it is going to make sure that it is okay. Now we just need to save our script. You'll know you've saved it when you've just got that nice and green. You can hold Control and press S to save if you want to, or you can go the old-fashioned way, file and save. So let's head back into Unity, and it will take a moment because it is compiling that script. Now, if you have any problems with your script, you'll see down the bottom you may have some red text saying there's an error. If you go to your console, it will tell you where the error is and more than likely how to fix it. If not, usually it's a case of capitalization, a missing semicolon, something like that. So for now, that short, simple script is just going to rotate whatever object that it is attached to. And we want to rotate this image right here. So theoretically, what should happen is it will rotate like so, because we've changed this Z position here. And all I did there was hold the mouse over Z and just hold the left mouse button down and move it across the screen. So by default, I want it to be 0, but we are going to attach that rotation script to the image. So drag and drop onto there. And we have that rotate speed set as 1. So if we press play now, we should see something happen. And that looks crazy. In the scene view, it really does look crazy. But this is how it would look on the screen of anyone playing it. So let's change that rotate speed now to much less. Let's have it as 0.1. And press play. And you can see it rotates much slower. Even maybe that's too fast. Maybe we want a much slower rotation, just something in the background that's happening. So you could also have that as 0.01. Remember, we're working with decimals here, so we don't need to worry too much about what we're doing. But there we go. I think that looks a little bit better. Remember, this is what we're aiming for here. This is the screen. So, next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit more UI to our scene, kind of preparing for when we start really delving into creating those questions and answers and everything. So, we're going to deal a little bit more with these buttons here. So I'm going to double click on answer A and zoom in. And I'm now going to right click on it, go to UI, and I'm going to click panel right there. Now it looks like it's faded a little bit, but it does also mean that if we press play, we can still click it. Now that panel is going to come in very, very handy because we can kind of manipulate the buttons a little bit. In terms of color, it's entirely up to you how you want to manipulate it with color. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the panel. I'm going to click the color. I'm going to have it as a slight bluish color, I think. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to have 3 sets of panels. Now, the reason I'm doing it this way and not manipulating the color on the buttons is because when it comes to the coding, it's going to be kind of fun to deal with it in the coding sense. A lot of what I do here really is coding more than anything, because I think that's what people struggle with more than anything. So it's a good way of us learning more about coding. So this panel, I'm going to hold Control and press D, and I'm going to change the color to green. And I'm going to hold Control, press D once again, and change that color to red. And that's going to be a nice deep red, I think. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that panel, I'm going to rename and have this as Open Panel. I'll have this one as Correct Panel, and have this one as Wrong Panel. And a clever little trick that we can use here is if we select Wrong Panel and Correct Panel, both together, all I've done there is hold Control and select both of them objects, and up here you'll see a little tick. Click that tick and it will revert back to that blue. Same principle can work if we untick the blue and then click on Wrong Panel, for example. We just click that and it turns it red. So hopefully you can see what we're going for here. We're going to use a cool little method to turn a panel on if we get it right or wrong. So if we retick Open Panel, and what I'm going to do is change the text to full on black. And I think I'll do that with all of the answers. Change the color of the text to jet black, just so it's a little bit more visible. Now what we can do is we can place those correct, wrong, and open panels on the other buttons as well. Rather than do the same as what we've just done, we can actually take each one, hold Control, press D to duplicate, and drag and drop them onto answer B. Now all you need to do is where it's got left up here, change that to 0, and then change right also to 0. And what that will do is it will shift it over to answer B. So if we were to turn the correct on, turn open off, we can see, well, imagine if we've just pressed that, that was the correct answer. Brilliant. So by default, I do want to have open panel on and the other two off. I'm also going to rename it just so as it is identical. In fact, now I think about it, maybe we should actually name it as open panel A, and wrong panel A. And obviously these would be B. This one would also be B. And this one would be C. No, it wouldn't. It'd be B, wouldn't it? Silly me. Okay, so let's take those three again. Hold Control, press D. Button on that. Change that. And this one. Oops. And change this one again. But remember, we do have to select them all and zero out the coordinates up here. So 0, 0, 0, 0. And it puts it center again of those. And finally, hold Control, press D. And let's change these. So we've briefly explored a very simple C# script, and we basically know how they function now inside methods, for example. So we're going to take that knowledge and expand it a little bit more, and we're going to change what this question says up here. So all we really need to know before we get into it is this section right here. So we need to change whatever this text box right here says, as well as the text inside these answers. So we need to keep in mind that this component is known as the text component, and we're changing the text subcomponent. And the same applies to all the answers as well. So we just need to keep that in mind for when we're coding this script. So how do we do this? Well, firstly, let's right click, create C# script. Now this specific script is going to be only to display things on the screen. So we're going to have a completely separate script that will generate a question for us a little later on. So for now, let's just call this script question display. And let's open that up in Visual Studio. Let's open the other one up there. There we go. We've opened the right one now. So as I said, this script is going to be using some UI elements to display things on our screen. Therefore, we need to tell the script that we're using some UI elements. And if you recall from the last tutorial, we need to add an extra line up here in the namespace to tell it that we're using some UI. So underneath using Unity Engine, we just need to type using Unity engine.ui. semicolon. And like I say, what this will do is you can think of it as a way of the script recognizing that it has to use some UI lines of code that we're going to tell it to. So let's now think about this logically. We're going to have to define a couple of variables here. The first one is going to be the text itself, so that'll be the question. And then there's going to be 4 more, which are going to be the answers, so A, B, C, or D. So we can define 5 variables. So let's get rid of this annotation right here because we don't currently need it. Obviously, we're going to expand the script a little further on as and when we need to, because it's not just going to be as simple as what we do in this tutorial, because once we start integrating other scripts into each other, we'll obviously need to add in much more to make them able to talk to each other. So for now, let's just focus on getting this script to work. Always start small and build upwards from there whenever you're programming. So let's start by saying public game object. And you'll notice G and O are capitalized. It is vital that you do have the capitalization there. And we're going to call this screen question and semicolon. So what we've done there is we've said we have an object that we're going to use in this script. It is a game object, which means it's an object in the scene itself, and it's called screen question. Now, obviously, the script doesn't know what that currently is, but don't worry, later on we will tell the script what object screen question actually is. The same also applies for the objects we're going to use now. So we're going to have the text on each answer box. So we use the same principle here by saying public game object and then answer A. And great thing is we can actually copy that line of code and then we can paste it a couple more times and just change the name as we need to. So A, B, C, and D. So we now have 4 variables in our script. Those 4 variables are the main aspects of what this quiz app actually is, the question and the answers. So ideally what we do need to do is we need to have this in void start. So I am going to write this in void start, but we will end up moving it into void update when we've built a bit more of this app. So for now, what we're going to say is when the game starts, we're going to say screen question dot get component. If you remember earlier, I said we need to deal with that component that's called text. So we're telling the script at this point that we need to get hold of a component. In spiky brackets, we then tell it what component it is we want to deal with. Like I said, it's text. So close spiky bracket. Then we need some parentheses. So open close bracket and then dot and then that sub component. And if you remember, that sub component was also called text. So we type text. So now what we've done here is we have accessed that text box that is inside our object. So whatever we put here after the equals will display inside that text box. So if we put in there our actual question again, how much wood could a woodchuck chuck If a woodchuck could chuck wood. And then quote again and semicolon. So that's our question. Next thing we need to do is we need to say what's answer A, what is answer B, what is answer C, and what is answer D. So what we can do is we can actually type again answer A dot get component, and in spiky brackets text open close bracket dot text. So we've basically repeated that getting component function, except we've applied it to answer A instead of the screen question. So we'll make that equal to A lots and lots. And then another trick like we did up here where we copied the actual variable, we can copy that line of code, we can place it below and below and below, and we just need to change things where we need to. So we'll change that to B, change that to C, change that to D, again B, C and D, and instead of lots and lots, let's have none, hardly any, and then 6, just because. So therefore we have created our question and our possible answers. So the great thing about this is that although we're going to put this in start at the moment, when we've advanced this script a bit more and created our generating script, we are then able to actually manipulate this even further with different variables. But for now, like I say, we just need to make sure that this is in place. So let's save that script. Let's head back into Unity and just allow it to compile. And what I'm going to do to kind of illustrate that this does actually work is I am going to delete that text and just put insert question, and I'm also going to change the text in A to A, so it is just that. So we can see here that if we apply this script to the scene and we apply each of those variables to the correct places, everything will update when we play the game. So to do that, we need to add a new game object. So up here, game object, create empty. And let's rename this empty game object. So right click, rename, and we'll call it master control. And I'm going to move this to the top of the scene, up here, top of the hierarchy, I should say. And now this master control object is going to hold most of the scripts that we need to deal with to make this game functional. So let's drag and drop the question display script up here. And over here in the hierarchy, in the inspector panel, you will see that we do have those variables right there, all 5 of them. They currently say non-game object. Now this is where we tell the script which object to reference when it changes. So this screen question, the one that we changed to how much wood could a woodchuck chuck, is going to be this question text right here. So if we drag and drop this over here, that's going to tell the script that screen question is this object here. Same applies to the answers. So A, B, C, and D. Now it's important you get those correct. Although they're all called text, they do apply to their each individual buttons. So let's press play now. And there we go. You can see that the game in its play mode, these buttons do actually work, which is great. That's exactly what we need. So realistically, we have to kind of work out how we're going to deal with it from here. So the way it's all going to work is we are going to generate a question, which passes it to that question display, and it displays it. We also then need to work with the buttons as well, and that's where things start to get not complicated, but I think more than anything it needs to kind of understand a little more how it's all going to work. Now, one massively important thing to deal with here is the fact that scripts are going to interact with each other. So before we end this tutorial, we're going to do a little bit of prep work ready for the next tutorial, because coding gets a little bit more, not complicated, but For me, fun. For some people, yeah, I suppose it could be complicated, but if we prepare, we're not going to have any problems. So ultimately, this script is going to contain a lot of variables because we need it to understand that we're feeding it a question. So let's put in place some more variables ready for when we have the other script feed it the question. So we're going to put public, and we're also going to put the word static. So this word static means that another script can feed information to this script. And realistically, you've got to remember that trying to get scripts to talk to each other is going to be somewhat easy in the long run, because in the sense of this particular app that we're creating, it's not complicated. Obviously, in bigger, larger games, there's different ways to deal with it. But for now, because this is a simple app to an extent, being able to use the word static to talk to each script is going to be the best, quickest, and easiest option to do. So the type of variable is going to be a string, because we're going to feed it some text, which, for example, could be this bit of text right here. And we're going to call it new question. So, like I say, preparing for the next stage of all of this to come. And obviously, we're going to need answers as well. So the same principle applies by saying public, static, string, and we need, so we're going to have new A. And then obviously we can copy and paste once again, just to kind of speed things up a little bit. So A, B, C, D, and save. So we are pretty much ready to go even further into development. And just in this tutorial, we've created this script. Now, to a lot of people, this may look complicated. To veteran programmers, this is just something quick and simple. But if you are new to programming and you've just got this far in the tutorial and you've written this script and you've never programmed before, well done. I think that's a massive step forward for anybody who's looking to get some programming done. So always starting small and building up is the best and easiest way to learn programming. So up till now we have the question display script, which is this one right here. But we need a script which is specifically for creating questions and answers. So what we're going to do is we're going to create that script, and we're going to just add 2 questions for now. And obviously, as we go further on, we will design more questions and randomize them. So let's go down here, right click, create C# script, and we'll call this one question generate. And it's opened that script up again. Sometimes Unity does that. It opens your previous script up rather than the one you want to open up, but it doesn't matter too much. So this script is going to be all about generating questions. So we can kind of use what we've written here, but for now, let's get rid of that annotation. We don't need it. And let's start by creating a couple of variables. So ultimately, what we're doing here is pretty much what we've done down here, but we're going to utilize these as well to pass things from one script to another. So that means that we can say in this script, public string, and we're going to say actual answer with a semicolon, and we should probably put that as static because other scripts are going to want to talk to this script. So what we're going to do is we're going to create this right here, and then we're going to also provide it with the actual answer in this script. And we're going to do this in the start method, but we are going to switch over to update again once we have developed the script further. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy these 5 lines of code from one script to the other. And you will get errors here Reason being is because these don't exist. However, we can actually use this to our advantage because we can now relate everything to this question display script. So the clever thing would be to say, instead of screen question.get component text, and remember we are in question generate now, we can say question display dot, and then down the list you'll see new question. So if we click that, what we've done there is we have said that question display dot new question, which is this variable right here, is actually equal to this question. And once again, we can use it to our advantage by saying for answer A, question display dot new A. So once again, we've said that this variable here is equal to this bit of text. And once again, we can do this, copy that, place it there, change that to B, down here, change that to C, and finally, that in there, change that to D. Now, things may go not astray here, but they may not align up in terms of time. Excuse me. So we may need to adjust it even further. But for now, for all intents and purposes, what this script is doing is generating a question. Now we need to actually put the correct answer to this. So we're going to say actual answer equals A with a semicolon. Now the reason we do this is to prepare for the next tutorial. You'll always find when coding you're doing a lot of preparing for the future, simply because if you don't, you end up backtracking far too much and probably wasting time to some degree. But what we're doing here is we're allowing the answer boxes to recognize which is the correct answer. So save that script for now. So we've generated this question. Now we need to feed it to here. So we've already fed it into these variables, but we need these variables to actually feed into the question. So what we do here is, I've always found the best way is to just add the variable itself. So in this case, new question. And this one will be new A. This one will be new B. This one will be new C. And this one is new D. So save that script as well. Now remember that this question display doesn't contain any text whatsoever. It only contains variables and references to objects. So now if we press play when we've applied this script, we should see all of this text transfer on screen. Because remember, this script doesn't deal with anything on screen at all. It only feeds info to the other script. So if we head back into Unity, and let's apply question generate to our master control. Now this is where we may end up with a slight timing issue, but if we do, we can easily fix it. So let's press play and see what we get. Perfect. So now we can see that this question is being applied from one script to the other. Now, there's many different ways to kind of deal with this, but ultimately what we need to do is we need to advance our question generate script further. So remember when I said that we're going to have it in start, but then move it to void update? Well, this is where we need to put in here now that we are generating a question. So we need to get that in motion, and then obviously we can eventually create random questions. So for now, we need to say public bool. So we're using a boolean to detect whether we have generated a question or not. And if we have, then we don't need to generate another right now. So public bool, and we can call this one displaying question. By default, we'll make that equal to false, because when the script starts, we won't be displaying a question. Now, if we go into void update down here, we are now going to use an if statement to say, are we currently displaying a question or not? And if we are, then we should do something. So if, and then in brackets, displaying question equals, and we're using a double equals here, I'll explain in just a moment, false, close bracket, and then open curly bracket. So much like the methods and the class, we're opening a curly bracket to dictate that this is a section of code specific to this section right here. And the reason we use a double equals is because that is the way the script is able to recognize, are we stating, are we asking, are we changing? So if you have a single equals, you are changing something. So like, for example, up here, we have a single equals, that's saying we're changing or making something here. A double equals, you can think of it as questioning. So it's asking a question. Is it equal to false? So it may seem primitive in some degree, but that's just the way it works really. So if you see a double equals, you can think of it as we're asking a question. So if this Boolean up here is equal to false, then what do? Well, we can place this here. So let's cut that out of there from start and place it in here. Now, one of the key things that we do have to change here is if we are displaying a question, we need to instantly change this to true. So displaying question equals true, semicolon, and save. So what that will do is it will tell the script that we are currently displaying a question. We don't need to generate a new one. And because we've now moved that from void start into void update, we can get rid of annotations and void start. No point having them, no point wasting empty lines of code, and resave the script. So let's just quickly run through what's going on here, because I realize it can be a little bit daunting to new people. This script is generating a question, but only if we are currently not displaying a question. So for example, the way we want all this to work is we generate a question, we answer it, we go through the sequence, and then we tell this script, remember we tell this script that we are no longer displaying a question and want to generate a new question. So because other scripts are going to talk to this one as well, specifically this one, we need to change that to static. And I'm hoping some of you did pick up on that as I was rambling on there. So let's save once again. So this whole function will still work exactly the same as it has previously if we head back into Unity. And let's press play. Now, this is where that timing issue comes in. Remember I said we could have a timing issue? This is a classic example. Now, I was hoping this would happen so I could explain a little bit more in visual terms what I meant by that. So essentially what's happened is this script has tried to display a question before it's even been generated, because this is running after this has ran. Now, the great way to get around this is a coroutine. And a coroutine allows us to manipulate time to some degree via C# scripting. So we are going to place these lines of code inside a coroutine. And obviously it is going to change over time. In fact, I think the best way to probably do it is to kind of feed again. But I do want to get into coroutines now rather than later, because we're going to use coroutines for sequencing later on. So let's place this into a coroutine for now. And then again, once we've learned more, we can jiggle it around. So to declare a coroutine, we use the term IEnumerator. Make sure you don't select IEnumerable, because that will not work. It needs to be IEnumerator. And we can call this anything we want, but probably wise to call it something relevant. So let's call it push text on screen, open close bracket, open curly bracket. And now what we need to do is we need to prevent it from doing anything instantly. And we can give a slight delay to the script if we need to. So yield, return new, wait for seconds, and in brackets, let's wait for just quarter of a second. So 0.25 F. Now you'll have noticed something I've done there which I haven't done before, and that's put an F after a number. If you're using a decimal number, you always have to put the F after it. Even if you use a whole number, you can put it after the whole number. It doesn't really matter too much. But whenever you use a decimal number, it's always handy to put that F there, because if you don't, you end up with an error, as you can see. So make sure that F is there. So once we've waited for just a quarter of a second, we can remove these lines of code and place them down here. Now we need to tell the script to run this coroutine, and we'll do it in void start again. So we'll say start coroutine, and then in brackets we'll put the name of that coroutine. In this case, for me, it's push text on screen. Oh, close bracket, and semicolon to close the line out, and save. So now, because we did have that timing issue of when lines of code were running between two separate scripts, we can eliminate that delay by using the coroutine. So if we head back into Unity, press play, and there we go. We've now fixed our error. As I said, things may change later on. It just depends how we get this working and the best course of action when creating this. But it's always wise to learn coroutines, simply because when we create a sequence of events, for example, when we've clicked a button and we do something else, we're going to need to do different things. So we're going to create another script for this series, and this one is going to contain all the scripts that we're going to use for all 4 answer buttons down here. Now this one is going to be kind of different in terms of the setup, simply because it's going to be an interactive script more than anything, because we need feedback from our buttons. So if we press A, we need something to actually happen that relates to that button. So let's start by right-clicking, create C# script, call it answer buttons, and let's open it up in Visual Studio. So as I said, there is going to be a couple of variables that we're going to use. So we're going to need to use the backgrounds of those buttons more than anything, simply because we need to get some feedback to say that, yep, it's the right answer, or nope, it's the wrong answer. So let's start by dealing with just answer box A. So public, and this is going to be a game object. And this is going to be the light blue background that we have for the button. And I'm sure I mentioned it earlier in the series. Yes, there are different ways of doing this kind of thing, but I wanted to do it this way just to kind of help a lot of people get coding a bit more understood, if you get what I mean, because coding is always the thing that stops people from making a lot of games these days. So the more coding we do, the more I feel it will help people in the long run. So we need to do a variable for the blue, the green, and the red. So let's have public game object, and we'll put answer A and back blue, and we will copy that line of code, place it here and there. And instead of having answer A back blue all the time, we change this to green, and we'll change this to red. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to put some annotations at the end. So double slash there, and we can say blue is waiting, so we're waiting to answer. Green is correct. And finally, this one here, we'll say red is wrong. Now, we're not going to use void start or void update in this. We're going to create completely new methods. Like I say, this is going to be a little bit different than what we've done previously. So we can get rid of those two methods and those annotations. And we're going to create a method specifically for the answer A button. So this can be called anything you want, but you should probably make it relevant to what we're doing. So we need to put the word public before the word void. The reason we do that is because this is a button, we need that button to understand where to pull information from and how to function correctly. So we need to make this method public within the script. So public void answer A, open close bracket, open curly bracket. Now, key thing to this is to make sure that we are getting the correct answer. Now, what I mean by that is if we go to question generate, we say here what the actual answer is. And we need to then determine if it is correct. So we need to put if, and in brackets, question generate dot, and then if we scroll down, or up I should say, sorry, to actual answer, double click it, and then we put equals, and then quote A, close bracket, open curly bracket. So what we've said here is the correct answer A if we're pressing the A button? If it is, then what we need to do is we need to turn off the blue background and turn on the green background. So answer A back green dot set active, and in brackets true. And then we also need to turn the blue one off, like I say. So answer A back blue dot set active false, semicolon, and save. And realistically, it's as simple as that. There is nothing much more to this. I mean, ultimately this script is going to be a little bit longer, but it's not going to be complex. It's always going to be static in terms of, are we pressing the right thing or not? And if we are, we go to the next one. If we're not, then move on, whatever. So let's just test for now that this does indeed work. So we know that A is the correct answer. So when we press A after reading the question, it means that it should highlight green. So let's head back into Unity to wait for it to compile. Now we need to add that answer button script to our master control. We also need to make sure that the answer A button does indeed have the correct method attached to it. So if we click answer A and scroll down here, and you'll see here list is empty. We need to click on plus. Now what we need to do is we need to tell it where the script is and where the method is. So here where you've got non-object, we can drag and drop master control onto there, and you'll see no function highlight. If we click that drop down list, we can then go down to our answer button script, and then we can select answer A. That now means that the script we've just written, that little method, will now work with this A button. So if we press play and click on A, of course, it does usually help if you apply the variables. Now, this is a great example of if you have an error or something isn't working in Unity, you'll see this red down the bottom to say something is wrong. This is a great opportunity to go into the console and see what could be wrong. It says here you probably need to assign the answer A back green variable of the answer button script in the inspector, which is exactly what we need to do. So it just goes to show how useful that console can be, not just for script errors, but for anything in general. So let's clear that, head back into project. Let's make sure we are on master control, and let's add these three variables. So open panel is going to be the blue one, correct panel is going to be the green one, and the wrong panel is going to be the red one. And now, if we press play again, we shouldn't have that same problem. So let's click the correct answer. Cool, we've got the right answer. Now, obviously, these other scripts on the buttons won't do anything just yet. Reason being is we need to code them. So let's get into coding them. Let's go back into our answer buttons. Now, we can use the same sort of method here. So I'm going to copy all of that method, public void answer A. I'm going to place it just below, and I'm going to change it to public void answer B. And if question generate actual answer equals B, which it isn't, So this is where we now need to think a little more about what we're doing. So if the actual answer is B, if it was B, then we would set answer B back green and answer B back blue. Now they have come up as an error. Why do you think they've come up as an error? Of course, because we've not declared them as variables. So we will have to declare them as variables. But what happens if we press B and it isn't the correct answer? Well, that's where we need to put an else statement for that. So underneath, let's then type, not in capitals, else, and then open curly bracket and press return. Now what this will do is it's basically a true or false. If this is correct, do this, otherwise do this. And what we want to do is we want to say, basically, copy those two lines of code, and instead of green, we want red. And again, because those are not set as variables, they still come as errors. So let's set them as variables now. So let's copy those three variables. Let's place them here. And we can say B, B, B. So now what this is saying is if we press B and it isn't correct, then we end up setting that on instead of this. And obviously we do need to do the same for A as well, simply because, you know, the answer could be B and we pressed A. So we also need to put up here, not in caps again, else, and then we can copy those two, place them here, and instead of green, red, and save. Now, before we go any further and do C and D, let's make sure that B does indeed highlight in red. So let's head back into Unity. Let's click on Master Control, and we just need to attach those right there. So let's go on to B, and open, correct, and wrong. Now, there are going to be some errors as it stands now because we could click multiple buttons, but again, don't worry about that for now. Once we get into sequencing, everything will work as intended. So let's press play and check out B. Okay, now does anyone know why that didn't work? Hopefully. Well done, guys, you got it. It's because we didn't apply that method to the button. So obviously, the script is there, but if the method isn't applied to the button, like we did with A, then that won't work. So once again, we go down to where it says list is empty, click plus, drag and drop master control, click no function, click on answer buttons, and click on answer B. So that's a quick, awesome way of just applying that script to the button. So now when we press play and try clicking B, nope, it's wrong. Obviously, it's wrong because, well, it's not none, it's lots and lots. And you can see there what I mean by it's kind of an error. It's allowed us to press two buttons when we really shouldn't have. But like I say, when sequencing comes, we can alter that as necessary. So let's head back into our answer button script and let's quickly add in all the rest. So we need C and D. So we can copy paste those, and then we can put C, 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 and then D, D, D. And obviously when you get around to coding and you become much more proficient in it, you can do things so much more quicker. You can even do it while you're talking, just like I am right now. And I'm not necessarily paying massive amounts of attention, but you can see what I'm doing here. All I'm doing is changing everything relating to the previous question, or rather the previous button, to the current button. So let's do D, D, there, D there, D there, D there, D, and D. So if you do have any problems with how these buttons work, just double check that you do have all the relative buttons in the relative methods. So this should only ever relate to C, at least at the moment. So let's once again head back into Unity, head to the master control object, and just apply those variables. So on C, we've got 3 right there, and then on D as well. Nice and simple. So obviously we still have to apply the method to each button. So once again, onto the button, press plus, drag the object, no function, answer buttons, answer C. Again, repeat. Master control, onto there, no function, answer buttons, and answer D. Press play. And let's just try answer C right now. There we go. So it's wrong. It's incorrect. So we now have our buttons fully functional. So you can see I have this open here. It's just a window that has a font in it. I'm just going to drag and drop this font, much like we did with the background, into Unity. Now, I'm not going to distribute this font. You can head to Google and look for any font at all. It's entirely up to you. I'm using this one for illustrative purposes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an extra folder specifically for fonts. So let's go to our assets, right click, create folder, and just call it fonts. And I'm going to drag and drop that font into its correct folder. Now, to apply fonts to different things within Unity is actually very, very easy indeed. Let's go to our question text, and where it's got font here next to Arial, let's change that to whatever font we've just brought in. You can do it with the buttons if you want to. Again, it's completely up to you how you want to do it, but it's just a case of going to each of the texts, and you can select each of them one by one and then set the font all together. So if we press play now, there we go. We can see that the font has changed. It's as easy as that to change it within Unity. So one of the main things that I want to deal with is the ability to stop different things happening. So you can see that we're able to click different answers there when realistically we shouldn't be able to at all. So you'll notice here that button does have a tick and B does indeed have a tick, but if we untick it, nothing actually happens here. So we can use that to our advantage. And all we're doing with that is turning off a component. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to modify our script a bit more to say, once we've selected an answer, disable all the other buttons to stop it doing whatever else. And then obviously when we get to the next question, we can re-enable them. So again, it all comes down to sequencing. So let's go to our script for the answer buttons. And we need to add in the 4 buttons as variables. So public, game object, answer A. And we can copy that. And we can do for B, C, and D. And obviously just change those names, B, C, and D. And it doesn't matter too much if they do have the same name as a variable in a different script. Because this script is only relative to itself, you don't need to worry about that too much. But what we do need to add is the namespace at the top to say we are going to be using some UI elements. So using Unity engine.ui, semicolon. And regardless of whatever we're doing here, we need to think that we do need to change each of these buttons whenever they are pressed. And rather than place it inside any of these, so because we don't want to duplicate it, we can place the same code just once in each method rather than once inside each if and else section. So after we've selected our answer, underneath we then need to put answer A dot get component in spiky brackets button open close bracket dot enabled equals false with the semicolon at the end. So all we've done there is we're saying answer A, where is your button component, and when it finds it, it disables it. So we put enabled equals false, which means we disable it. Need to do that once again for B, C, and D. So that's for B, that's for C, and that's for D. And let's change that to B, C, and D. And we can also place those at the end of each of the other methods. Now, once again, the reason I'm doing this is so as you can see the genuine flow of what each button is doing. There are multiple different ways that you can do multiple different things in Unity. This is just a nice, quick, simple way of showing, well, that's the flow of it. That's everything that answer A does. So let's see if it works. So let's save it. Let's head back into Unity. And again, because we've added more variables, we do need to go to master control and make sure that button A is there, button B, C, and D. So if we press play now, how much wood could a woodchuck chuck wood? Lots and lots. Well, we've got that right. It now means that we can no longer select any of the other answers. We can't even double click the correct answer. Now that does come in handy when we're creating that score method as well, because we don't want to be able to click the same one over and over and magically get a million score. But let's just make sure that none and nothing else works. Let's check on C as well. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure D is going to work as well. Yeah, awesome. So the idea of what we're going to do here is once we have selected an answer, we want to be able to set up a system which generates the next question. And that's going to come pretty soon. I think once we have multiple questions that we can generate, things are going to start looking fairly interesting. And I can't wait to actually get a little bit further in this series because it's really cool how all this turns out. So let's now put some UI in for our current score and what will be our high score, because obviously we want to have a high score that we want to save. So let's go to game object, let's go UI, and let's have what can we use? Let's have a panel at the top of the screen. So when we put that panel in, you'll notice it covers the entire screen. So we can use the rect tool just to kind of manipulate it a little bit more. Let's place it in roughly in the middle at the top somewhere. Round about there. I think that's okay. And I'm going to change the colouring to a lot darker, just so as it gives it a bit more something to it, because I want to have white text on there. I might change the alpha as well, but it's entirely up to you how you want to display this bit of your game. So this panel is going to contain the score and high score. So let's add in 2 new text boxes for that. So right click, UI, and let's go to text. And this is going to be our score. So let's have it in caps, I think. So score, and obviously by default, by start, it's going to start with 0. Let's change the font to the one we brought in this tutorial, and let's change it to white. And let's move it to the edge round about there, and probably increase the font. There we go. So next thing we're going to do is rename that to current score. And I'm going to hold Control and press D to duplicate and change that to high score. And I'm going to move this over to the other side. And I'm just going to call this best. Like so. So that's all set up ready for us, but we do need to set the anchoring as well. Remember, anchoring is important. So this up here, I want to change the panel to be, let's have it stretched at the top rather than stretch the entire screen. Let's have the current score anchored in the top. In fact, let's have it middle right, and let's have the high score in middle left. So no matter what size the screen is going to end up, you'll always have those lines of text relative to the rest of the game. So if we press play, it should look fairly decent. Yeah, I think that looks okay. One thing that has been bugging me just a little bit is I think I want to increase the brightness on that. Not too much though, that's a bit too much. Let's see how that looks now. Okay, yeah, I'm happy with that. So, up until this point, we pretty much have the functionality all in place. The only real things we need to do is to create the score, save the score, and generate questions. There are obviously a couple of other things that we need to do in the meantime. just to kind of make it a little bit more interactive. And one of those things is sounds and music. So you can see I have this open once again, just 3 little audio files, and I'm going to select them all and drag and drop them into Unity. I'll leave a link to these audio files in the pinned comment below. So if you're watching this individual tutorial or watching the full series, you'll still find it in that pinned comment. Just download it, bring them into Unity, just like I have. You may need to unzip them first, or you can use your own audio files if you want to. So let's start with the background music. This one right here we can see is clearly quite a lot louder than the correct and incorrect. So these two are sound effects, and this is just some background music. So if I put this into Unity, it's going to be very, very, very loud. So we need to manipulate it a little bit. So let's go to Master Control. Let's right click and let's create empty. And I'm going to have this as just BGM, short for background music. And all I'm going to do is drag and drop that quiz BGM onto that object up here. And you'll see that we have an audio source component. Now I'm not going to go into too much of what all of this is, because realistically all we're doing is just having some background music. We don't need to go in depth too much. There are 2 things we need to make sure we are aware of. Firstly, we need to have play on awake ticked, at least just for now, because we may change it later on depending on the sequence of our quiz app. And we also need loop on. Basically, this just means that it loops constantly. You know, there's never a period where it just stops and feels a bit awkward, I guess. One thing you can play around with is the volume, and I would recommend playing around with the volume quite a lot. I'm actually going to put this down to 0.05 because I know that this background music I created is rather loud. So I'm going to press play now and see how this goes. Okay, fair enough. Not quite sure how loud that's going to sound to you guys. It sounds okay to me, but I have found sometimes that it can be a bit crazy. If we move it, you can see just how loud that can get, and that wasn't all the way up to 1. So I'm going to keep it at 0.05, but we can play around with the pitch as well to make it a little different. So if I press play again and move the pitch around, you can see just how it sounds. That's madness. What a madness. And also all the way down. Yeah, you can see what's going on, can't you? Yeah. I guess it's up to you how you want it to sound. Again, it's your game, not mine. So I'm going to leave that background music as it is. That's going to start and it's going to loop constantly throughout. I guess it's kind of boring, so maybe use your own if you want to. So let's deal with some of these sound effects. This is where programming and sound mix together to create something kind of cool. So let's add 2 more game objects to our scene. One's going to be for the correct answer, the other's going to be for the incorrect answer. So on Master Control again, let's right click, create empty, and we'll rename this to correct FX, and let's drag and drop correct onto here. Now, we do need to untick play on awake. The reason being is because we want to be able to control when this sound effect plays. We don't want it to play straight away when the scene starts, because that would just be a little bit weird. So all we realistically need to have is that unticked. Everything else is probably fine, but you can play around with different settings if you want to. So let's also set it up for the wrong answer, incorrect. So hold control, press D on correct to duplicate it, and let's rename it to wrong effects. And then up here where we've got correct, you can just drag and drop the incorrect audio file and place it there. So we now have the 2. We have right and wrong. We need to make sure we assign them correctly in the script to be able to play correctly. And I realize I have indeed got them inside the scripts folder. We probably should move them out of there because they're not scripts. So let's right click and create a new folder. Just call it audio, and let's move each of those out of the audio folder, out of the scripts folder into the audio folder. So even if you move them, they will actually move to the correct location. And a good way of defining whether they have moved to the correct location in here is if we click it, you can see it goes to wherever that asset is stored. So it will still work as intended, even if we've moved them from that folder. So let's figure out now how we can get these buttons to play a sound effect if we've chosen the right or wrong answer. Well, let's head into the answer button script. And remember when I said that this script is static in a sense, it'll never really change. It's something that you build upon. So once you've got the basic rundown of how it works, and realistically this is now a sequence, it's never going to change. So the next set of variables that we're going to add are going to be those two sound effects. And we're going to type public audio source, and let's call it correct effects, and then public audio source wrong effects, semicolon. Now, the way this is going to work is we are going to tell the script that the correct effects is this one and the wrong effects is the other one. They just need to play them at the correct time. So that means that whenever we have green, we play the correct effects. So underneath there, correct effects dot play, open close bracket, semicolon. So what that's going to do is once we've set the green background active, it will then play that sound effect. So that also means that after we've displayed the red one, if we've chosen the wrong one, we say wrong effects dot play, open close bracket, semicolon. And that is basically just repeated a couple of other times for the other buttons. So you just have to make sure that you do put the correct line of code in the correct place. So B, C, and D, all for the correct sound effect. And if we take the wrong one, place it here, and here, and here. If you end up in a situation where both of the sounds play at exactly the same time, chances are that you've put them in the same place by mistake. So just quickly double check that. So let's save that script, and then let's head back into Unity and let it compile. Now remember that script is on the master control object, and we just need to set those two objects, and we don't need to set the actual audio asset itself. We can set the game object that we put that audio asset on. So in this case, we've got correct effects, which would go down here. I'm just going to put wrong on there as well. Now, the key to all of this is pressing the button and seeing if it does work. So let's press play. Brilliant. And none of the other buttons work. I'm really not sure how loud that background music is, so I may put it down even further because I feel like in the edit it's going to be quite loud. And sometimes when you've got audio too loud, the whole thing is just unsalvageable. So I'm going to put it down even further. Hopefully it was okay. Let's press play and check out the wrong, incorrect. So, oh, we got it wrong. Perfect. So let's make sure the other buttons work as intended. Yep. That's good. And finally, cool. So, sound effects work. And like I say, you can use any sound effect at all. You don't have to use the exact same sound effects that are used. Same with the music. But the reality is, that's all you need to do. Just a couple of lines of code, as long as your audio files are there, all put together. You can make anything play at any given time. You could even add a sound effect for when a question appears if you want to. Again, it's entirely up to you. All you would need to do is just put whatever it is, .play at the correct point in your script. So we need to head into our question generate script. And if you remember this one from a couple of tutorials ago, or if you're watching the full series video about an hour ago, we had this created and we kind of set it up ready for when we want to generate new questions. So this is going to be a pretty long script, but it's mainly just kind of repeating itself over and over, but with different questions and answers. The way you can think of this is ultimately going to be a bit of a library with questions. Now, the more questions you have, the longer this script will be. So I'm going to create a couple in this tutorial and then give you basic instructions how you would be able to go even further, developing much more questions. So a good quiz app would end up having thousands of questions. If you've got the patience for that, that's brilliant. Now, the way we're going to do this is we're going to use a random number that will dictate which actual question we are going to display. So firstly, we need to give ourselves a actual variable that's going to contain that random number. And we'll end up with a line of code which will say this is going to generate this random number, and we'll be able to pick from one of however many questions. So we're going to create, let's say, 4 random questions in this tutorial. Obviously, like I say, if you want to create more, you can. So we're going to have public int, short for integer, because this is just going to be a whole number, and we're going to have this as question number, semicolon. So we need to place it in the correct position of our script, and we're going to end up nesting a couple of functions here. So we're going to nest this if statement inside another if statement, which is going to contain this question right here. So inside the if displaying question is false, we now need to say question number equals random dot range, and in brackets we need to put the minimum and maximum numbers. So as I said, we're going to generate 4 different questions. So the minimum is always going to be 1 in this case, comma, and then the maximum. So the maximum could be thousands, it could be hundreds, but what you should always do is put the maximum 1 above whatever you want it to be. So for example, we're going to generate 4, but the maximum should always be 5. What that means is it will generate up to that maximum, but it won't generate the maximum. So it will either do 1, 2, 3, or 4. So it's always a good idea to put it 1 above whatever the maximum would be, simply because it's just one of those little quirks of programming this way. So let's close bracket and semicolon. At this point, we've now generated a number randomly, and we can say that if the number is 1, then let's have this woodchuck question. If it's 2, let's have a question on Super Mario. So we can say if, and in brackets, question number equals 1, close bracket, open curly bracket, and now we can actually use a cool little trick. We can delete that close bracket, go to where actual answer A is, hit return, and then place the close bracket there, and it will automatically indent your code as needed. And you can see how this is now functioning. You can see it going all the way through, and it's nesting these if statements so as it recognizes what it's doing. So what's happening here is we're saying, yep, it's false. We're generating a number. If it's 1, then display this. If it's 2, display something else. So let's copy this line of code here. Let's place it below. And we also need to take the if statements as well. I should have copied that in the first place. So we're saying if question number is equal to 2, then we also have to say displaying question is true, because each and every time we have to make sure that we do display it. So let's see what this can be. Who is the brother of Luigi? And D can be Link. C can be Mario, as I put there. This can be DK. And let's have B as Toad. So what we're saying here is that the answer is actually C. Now, we go further down, and this is where each individual question can occur naturally. So I'm going to put a bit of space in there so as I can see. And let's take question number 2. And let's duplicate it. And now all you need to do is put your questions and answers in each section here. Like I said, you can think of this in short terms as like a bit of a library where all the questions are going to be. Let's say, I'm not sure. Where is Japan? We've got Africa. Let's have B as the correct answer on this one. So Asia. Let's have Europe, and let's have Antarctica. So the correct answer there is B. And let's do one more. As I said, we'll do 4 in here, and obviously if you want to go further, you absolutely can. I don't think you're going to be restricted. Your only restriction is your own knowledge, I guess. Let's have, how old is the world? What haven't we had? We haven't had D as the answer. We'll have D as the answer. Let's have billions of years, 10 years. Let's have 6 months. Obviously these are just stupid answers, but you get the idea. 1,400 years. So obviously the answer is D. And now let's save. So this script is going to generate a random question, and it is going to feed it into our question display whenever we start. So our question display will display on screen whatever random number we have generated. So let's head back into Unity and just let the script compile. And if we go on master control, you can see that nothing has really changed at all apart from this question number. So this is a visual indication of which question we have generated. So let's give this a go. Let's press play. Where is Japan? Perfect. It's in Asia. Awesome. And let's try that again. Who is the brother of Luigi? Let's say Link, because we've got it wrong. In fact, no, let's say DK. We've got it wrong. So let's try and get a duplicate question so we can see if we do get the right answer. There we go. So, perfect. So if you followed me to the T with all the scripts, everything should function as normal now. So the buttons know what the answer is going to be. And obviously we're generating the same question over and over because there's only 4 possibilities. You've got a 1 in 4 chance right now. But the idea is that a random question will generate. 10 years old. Wrong. So hopefully if you guys have gone further and you've got lots and lots and lots of questions, you can now see that this really is generating a random question every single time. Cool. As I said, there's no real limit you could go to with this. If you want to add more, all you would need to do is go into your question generate, add 1 to your maximum, and then scroll down and just place your question. So we could say 5 now. What? Where, if I can spell, where does Jimmy love? Is it A, Vegas, obviously? Is it B, Tokyo? Is it C, London? Or is it D? I'll just put Rio. And obviously the answer is going to be A. I mean, I suppose trick question really. I think I do love them all, but that's beside the point. So A would be the answer. Head back into Unity, and that's all it really is. It's set up and ready to go for that question to be fed into. Let's see if we can actually get it to generate real quick. There we go. So we've got it. Vegas. Awesome. So that is pretty much how the app is going to work from here. So basically creating the score system and feeding onto the next question is all going to be done technically inside one script. I think it just kind of depends how you want to do it, because at this point there is a million ways that you can do one thing in Unity. It just depends whatever you feel comfortable with. We're going to go with probably the easiest way of doing it. So firstly, let's go into question generate script. And the key to this script is going to be the bool that we have right here, displaying question. We now need to set that to false to display a new question. So if we have a question on the screen, we're obviously somewhere down here, and we've set the displaying question as true. I think technically we don't really need that here, so what we're going to do is refine our script a little bit. Let's take displaying question out of there, and let's place it inside the initial if statement, because we don't need to repeat it over and over if it's going to be the same outcome each and every time. So there's no point in those lines of code, so let's get rid of them. And there we go. So now it only runs the once, which is good for us. So once we change that back to false, it means a new question will be generated. So let's save that script and go to answer buttons. This is where we're going to create that sequence to basically give us more score or reset the score and move on to the next question. So it's all going to be done inside the answer button script. So we now need to add a variable for the score itself. So let's add public game object, and we'll have current score. And obviously we're going to need an actual number to visually see that score. So we're going to need an integer. So public int, and we'll just have it score value. So if we get a question correct, let's say we get 5 points. If we get it wrong, it resets to 0. So that means that every time we have played the correct sound effect, we can say score value plus equals 5 semicolon. And what that's doing is it's adding 5 to whatever number score value currently is. So if it's, for example, 15, it will add another 5. If you had just the equals, it would make it equal to 5. But what we're doing is adding 5 to it. So we can use that line of code once again and place it inside each of the correct answer sections. Obviously, the inverse of that, we need to reset the score back to 0. So we can place it in there, but instead of having plus equals 5, we just make it equals 0. Now, if you do want to subtract a value from the score instead of resetting, you would just have minus equals instead of plus equals. That's all you need to do. So let's take that score value again out of there, or rather copy it, I should say, and place it in there, and also place it in here. Now, we'll have the void update back. The reason being is because I don't want to have too many more lines of code just to update the score on screen. So what we're going to do is beneath those variables, we're going to go void update. And I know we deleted it out before, didn't we? But it doesn't really matter. We can always add it. Let's delete private because it doesn't need to be private. And what we're going to say is current score dot get component, and in spiky brackets, text, because we're dealing with that text component again, aren't we? Open close bracket, dot text equals, and if I recall, it was score in capitals with a semicolon, then a space, and then quotes again, and then plus, and we have score value, semicolon, and save. So what this is doing is it is updating on our screen our current score value. So current score is the object which contains the word score and then the number, and score value has our actual score. So it will display on screen whatever score value is. So let's head back into Unity. All good. And now what we need to do is on master control, we need to add current score down here, and that is this item right there. And now if we press play and get the correct answer, we should see this increase to 5. So Asia. Score 5. Perfect. So we know the scoring mechanic works, but now we need to have the mechanic that moves us on to the next question. So let's head back into the answer buttons. Now, the key to this is going to be via a coroutine. So I want to wait for just probably a second, maybe 2 seconds before we move on to the next question, just to give ourselves a bit of chance to see that, oh, we got the right answer. What were the other answers? If we got it wrong, that kind of thing. So what we need to do is head down the bottom and create a coroutine. So I, numerator, next question, open close bracket, open curly bracket. Now, like I say, we're going to yield, return new, because we want to wait for about 2 seconds maybe. Wait for seconds. You don't have to wait for 2, you can wait for 1, half a second. It's entirely up to you how you want your app to kind of flow. So 2, semicolon. And then after that, we need to basically set everything back on after we've displayed the question. But we kind of need to get it all in sync, I should say. So let's establish what we need to do with these buttons. Firstly, we need to set them all back on. So here, where we've got these 4 lines of code, let's copy those, go down a couple of lines inside our coroutine and paste them. And instead of false, we need this to say true. Like so. And now what we need to do is we need to turn off all of the green or red indicators and turn on all of the blue ones. So that means that everything we turned on, we now need to turn off. So we may as well just take this one for starters. So answer A back green. Let's place that here and change it to false. And obviously we're going to need to do that with B, C and D. And it's just a case of copying and pasting, and you can do it this way. I always say that if code already exists in its simplest form, there's no point retyping out. You can always just kind of copy and paste and just make things easier. If code exists, just reuse it. So this is red. So answer A back red is also set as false. And here, so that's going to be changed to B, C, and D. And now we need to set the blue ones on, which is the blue. So let's change that to answer A back blue. And that is going to be true. So here, all this is doing is resetting how the buttons look visually. So there's A, B, C, and D. Now, at the end of it, all we need to do is we need to say question generate, give us a brand new question. So we can say question generate dot displaying question equals false, semicolon. So what that will do is it will tell that question generate script to follow that sequence again and give us a new question. So how do we get this next question working correctly? Well, all we really need to do is once we have pressed a button and once we have worked with our score, we now need to set active this little coroutine. Simple as that. So I think it doesn't really matter whatever we do, because as long as we press the button, we need that coroutine to run. So we don't need to place it inside these if and else statements. We can just have them as an extra line of code in each method. So start coroutine and in brackets, next question, open close bracket, semicolon. Take that line of code and place it inside the other 3 methods and save. And now head back into Unity. Before we go any further, let's just double check that this master control is going to function correctly. So we've got everything in there. I think that should be okay. We do have the flow working, so we know the answers work. So yeah, let's see if this sequence carries on and adds our score when we start getting them correct. Who is the brother of Luigi? Mario. It's generated the same question, that's why that's happened. So, we can see that something has gone astray here. Okay, so the whole sequence has gone... It works, because obviously we can select a new question, but something has gone astray. So let's check out what's gone wrong. So question display. Right, so I think I mentioned this quite a while ago, saying that we would have to move things around. What we'll do here is we need to update all of these. So what basically happened is we have generated a new question, but we haven't displayed that new question on the screen. We do need these to be on the screen. Now, best way of doing this is to place this coroutine inside the update and create a new bool to say, we've just created a question, please update it. So we will say public static bool please update. By default, in fact, yeah, by default we'll make that false, semicolon. So what we do is inside void update, if, oops, too many brackets there, if please update equals false, then do the following, and that's going to be to start the coroutine. And also set please update as true. So now let's get rid of void start and the annotation because we don't need it. So essentially what's going to happen is this is going to do the exact same thing as void start. It's going to update, run this coroutine, and we'll see the question on the screen. So first, let's make sure that that does indeed work. So let's press play. And there we go. So that's displayed on screen. So it now means that when we have created a new question, so in question generate, we need to tell this script to display it. So we need to say please update equals false. So down here, after we've got displaying question is false, display question, set it as true, we've generated our question. The very, very last line of code, let's put an annotation here. All questions go above this line. And then we'll say question display dot please update equals false, semicolon, and save. So at that point, we've generated the question, and we've now told this script to read the information from that generate script. So finally, let's head back into Unity. Let's press play, and let's see the sequence as a whole. So Asia. How old is the world? Billions of years. Got a score of 10 now. Who is Luigi's brother? Mario. So let's go for a wrong answer now. Let's say 6 months. And it's wrong. But it still generates the new one. And there we go. This whole sequence will just keep going and going and going. So as long as you've put the correct answer in the correct place, it will work. Now obviously it's generating the same question over and over because I only have a choice of 5 questions right now. Obviously if you've got hundreds or thousands of questions, you're not going to generate the same question. And there we go, there we are, reset. So that is pretty much the sequence of events to make this whole app work. So saving and loading a high score is all done in Unity via something called player prefs. A player pref is a way of storing information even when the application or the executable has been closed and restarted. So essentially, if our best score is, let's say, 20, and we end up getting 25, we want to be able to save that best score as soon as we get it. So as if we fail the quiz and start again, our best score will be maintained. So let's go to our answer buttons. And what we're going to do is create another variable in here, which is going to be our high score. Now, I know it seems a bit backwards the way we're going to do this, or it will seem backwards when we do it, but we're going to sort the loading before we sort the saving. I know it seems crazy, but it's just the way it works, and it's much easier in the long run. So let's create another variable just below here. So public int, and we'll say best score. So the best score is going to be whatever it is when we load it up. So we are going to need void start because we need it to load as soon as the game starts. So void start, and also we only need it to run the once at this point. It doesn't need to be private, and we're going to say best score equals player prefs, and it's a capital P on both player and prefs, dot get int. So basically what we're saying here is we're getting an integer out of a player pref, and in brackets and quotes the name of the player pref you want to store your high score. So let's call it best score quiz, quote, close bracket, semicolon. So at this point we have retrieved whatever is stored inside best score quiz. Now we need somewhere to display it. So let's say as another variable, public game object best display, semicolon. And obviously because we've done it before, we know how we can display that on the screen itself just by saying best display dot get component, and in spiky brackets text, open close bracket, dot text equals best colon space quote and then plus best score. So we're saying here our best score is whatever was inside that player pref. So it's loaded that player pref there. That's all there is for loading. Just those two lines of code to load and display on the screen. It's as easy as that. The trick is, how do we save this best score? Well, we have to use a bit of math here because we have to establish if our current score is better than our best score. And if it is, then save it. If it isn't, just carry on as normal. And that can be done all below. So down here, where we have next question, before we have actually done any of this, so remember that we have actually added our value here. So before we actually wait for the 2 seconds, let's use that 2 seconds to quickly save our best score if it is indeed the best score. So if, and in brackets, best score is lower than, and that is the arrow facing to the left, that means lower than. We don't need to have equal to because there's no point overwriting the best score with the current score. It's always got to be lower. So if best score is lower than score value, that means we have just achieved a best score. So that means we can put into the player pref the score value. So let's say player prefs dot set int, not get, it's now set because we're setting a value inside it. And then in the actual brackets themselves, you need to put the name of that player pref. Now what I always do is I copy and paste whatever the name is. It's important to get it exactly right. If you don't get it exactly right, you run the risk of it not working, because if, for example, this says best score quiz and the one below says best score quiz with 2 Z's, it's not going to work because it'll be a mismatch. So I always paste, just so as I know it's going to be correct. And then after the comma, we tell it what value we want to put inside that player pref. So in this case, we want to put score value in there. Like so. So that basically says that if our score value is greater than best score, so best score lower than score value, it means that we're going to put whatever is in score value into best score quiz. And at the same time, I think we probably should also update the best score value on our screen, because you don't want to have your current score as like 30, but your best still says 15 or something like that. So we need to make sure that that is also updated. And the great thing we can do there is we can say this line right here. So let's copy this line of code. Let's head down to the bottom and let's place it below. But instead of it being best score, we will have score value and save. So now what we've done is a couple of lines to save the score and a couple of lines to load the score. So even when we stop the application running or anything like that, it will retain the high score because it's inside a player pref. And I suppose you can think of player pref as maybe like an external variable. So let's head back into Unity. Let's go to master control because we have to adjust this here. So the best display, which is high score, goes onto there. Remember, high score is that one over there that says best. So now let's press play. Obviously, they will both load as 0. So let's say lots and lots. And you can see our best has indeed updated to 5. Let's get this wrong. Oh, that's no good. But let's get this one right again. Our best still says 5. How old's the world? 6 months. So we've lost again. So if we stop and then reload the game, the best will load as 5. It will remember what we've done. So let's try and get another best score. Mario. Where is Japan? It's in Asia. So you can see both have updated. We've now got our best score. So it's on 15. It's on 20. So let's get the next one wrong. Oh, never mind. So let's get this one correct. And you can see that that best doesn't change. It's still sitting there. Oh, okay. So we do have a bug there. Right. I had a feeling that might happen. So our best has been erased there. So let's work out what went wrong. So what we're saying is that down here, we're basically saying that the best score and score value have gone astray. So we now need to debug this a little bit and see what exactly has happened, because ultimately this should always be the case. I think it could be to do with the fact that we use the best score to overwrite. So let's think of a good way around this. So score value. Right, so if we get one wrong, this is where it can go astray, I think. So let's actually reload it and see what the best loads as. So it does indeed save it. So let's quickly backtrack. So this bit doesn't need to, we don't need to worry about that because we know that works. This updates our score, so that's fine. Come down here, and this updates. Okay, so I don't quite see why that should have done that, but what we'll do is if we click on master control, we can watch these values down here change. So best score is 10, there we go. So lots and lots. Vegas, so we're on 10. So now it should save. Right, so best score is currently set as 10. So that ultimately means we've found what the problem is. If we look down here, these two scores should now match. It means that inside our script for the answer buttons, we have to make best score equal to score value right here. So best score equals score value and save. So that's the reason that that has happened. We have missed off the fact that we need to make the best score the same as score value rather than just update it. So now that will eliminate any errors that we get within the game. Let's give it a quick test to make sure that that is all okay. So Vegas, lots and lots, still lots and lots because it's the same question again. We've got the same question. Okay, so we're on 20. Let's get this wrong. let's get this one correct, and let's get the next one correct. Excellent. So that bug has now been fixed, and if we quit out, restart, we should be able to see best is 20. So as it stands right now, I have a texture which may look familiar to most people. Obviously, it's not the actual image because I don't want to risk any copyright involvement here. But you can do a quick Google search for any kind of image. I mean, if you want to do the same as I do, just head to Google, do a quick Google search for this particular image. You should know what it is, hopefully. Maybe, fingers crossed you do. Anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to add this into the scene, and we're going to make it a visual question by where the question says, which video game series would you most likely see this? And then it displays on screen, maybe with a little jiggly animation. So let's get that onto our screen now and create a nice, quick, simple animation. So let's go to Game Object, let's go to UI, and let's go to Raw Image. And I want to have this in the center position. So anchor, center, position, 0 and 0. So it is center. I guess we could also probably move it down just a little bit to probably there, just so as we have room for the question itself. And let's drag and drop whatever image you've got onto the texture right there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a quick little animation to get this moving a little bit. So right click, create and folder, and let's create an animations folder. Let's make sure we're inside it, and let's rename this raw image to be, let's call it visual 001. So if you have more visual aspects of your game, you just have 2, 3, 4, whatever you would want it to be. So now let's click on the animation tab, and I think I mentioned it a long time ago in this series. If you don't have it, you just click the 3 little dots here, click on add tab, and at the bottom you can see animation, and you'll end up with this. Now this is very, very simple to use. All we need to do is click on create, and let's put turn anim, and then you'll be presented with this. What you need to do is click the record button right there, and this will turn red. That's indicating that we are in record mode, and now we can put physical values into all of this to make it animate in a cool and simple way. So what we're going to do is start at keyframe 0, and that's the very first frame of the animation. So it ends up looking like this before it starts any animation. And we're going to be dealing with the rotation, which is right here. So we want it to start on 0, 0, 0. We have to make sure that we have a little node here to represent that keyframe as set. And what I always do is I overwrite whatever value I'm using with 1, for example, and set it back to 0. Same here, just to make sure, and here. Just to make sure that we do indeed get everything correct. So you see these little nodes here, that represents a keyframe. That means the animation will move to whatever we've put there. This all works in 60 frames a second, so it means that if we go to frame 60, this is 1 second later in the animation. And if you hover your mouse over the Z or Z, you can kind of see the movement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to, let's say, to 5, and then hit return. And then after another 60 seconds, 60 frames, I don't know why I said 60 seconds, another 1 second, 60 frames. I'm going to set this back to 0. That should be 5, my apologies. So it should be 60 frames. So we're going from 0 to 60. Then after another 60 frames, so it would be frame 120, if I could do math correctly. I'm going to set this back to 0. And now after another 60 frames, so frame 180, I'm going to set this to -5. So it kind of rotates the other way. And now after another 60 frames, so frame 240, I'm going to set this back to 0. So it's back in its starting position. That means it can loop seamlessly. So once we've done that, I'm going to press that record button, head back to project, and you'll notice you have 2 icons here. One is the animation itself, and the other is the controller. Now, we don't need to worry too much about the controller because we're not going to attach any other animations to this particular object, but make sure with the animation itself that you do have loop time ticked. So when we press play, we should see this animate like that. Cool. So now I'm going to select it and turn it off. So the trick to all of this is to make that display during the question which is relevant to it. So if we go and select our script and let's go to question generate, we now need to create another question. So because we're creating another question, let's add one more. Let's head down and let's copy this section here and let's place it here, and we'll say, which video game series would you see this? And we'll put A, Zelda, and B, Halo, C can be Mario, and D can be Final Fantasy. Obviously the answer is C. So we need to add something a little extra here. We need to add in another variable which relates to that object. So we can say public game object visual 001 semicolon, and down here, before we change the actual answer to C in this case, we put visual 001 dot set active true semicolon and save. Now heading into the answer buttons, we now need to make sure that we do turn off any visual aspects. Now if you do have a lot of visual aspects, visual questions, then you may be better off using an array. But in this case, because we've only got one, we don't need to worry too much about it. So I'm going to place that here. So public game object and visual 001 semicolon, and all the way down here it just becomes part of the next question routine. So we can say visual 001 dot set active false and save. So all we've really done here is we have allowed the script to display that object if indeed it needs to display, but no matter what, it will always turn it off just so as it can reset the entire script. So if we go to master control, we need to add in visual 001 over here, and then also down the bottom. And now let's press play and hopefully we can generate it. There we go. Which video game series would you see this? Obviously Mario. And it should disappear with the next question. There we go. Who's Luigi's brother? Mario again. Let's see if we can get it to reappear. And I'd tell you what's generating the same questions. It would help if I had a lot more in here, wouldn't it, really? How old is the world? Billions of years. Come on, show me the question again. It really wants to give me the same question over and over. Like I say, if you've got thousands of questions, it's not going to do this. It's because I have such small amount of questions. My knowledge is clearly limited. Ooh, 160. Will you just give me the question again, Unity? Come on. Stop giving me the same questions. Stop giving me the same questions, Unity. There we go. Which video game series would you see this? Let's go Zelda. So we've got the wrong answer. Doesn't matter. Oh, it's giving the same question again. So, yeah, all good. Goodbye. There we go. Carry on. So, that's how you can create a visual question. Obviously, it doesn't look perfect, but that's the mechanics of how you do this. You would obviously need to take a little bit more time with it all and just make it look better and more visual. Obviously, I've kind of rushed a little bit with this, but the general idea is that all of this, you learn the mechanics and you just go crazy with it and make your own cool, awesome game. Don't forget, click the subscribe button and click on the bell icon as well. Stay up to date with every tutorial I upload to my channel on video game development. And if you've enjoyed this series, please feel free to check me out on Patreon or YouTube memberships where you'll earn things like early access, exclusive content, project files, and so much more. With that in mind, let's get to work. So, a splash screen is basically like, you could think of it as an intro screen to your game. In this case, we're going to have a nice white screen, maybe with the game name, and then it fades and we start the quiz itself. Now the great thing about this, the way we're going to do it, is we don't really need to change much of what we've created already. It'll do as it is. What we're going to add is a new game object, UI, and raw image. This is going to be stretched across the entire screen, so we want anchor, this one here, and we want to set 0, 0, 0, 0 so it covers the entire screen. And I'm going to rename it to splash image, and I'm going to add some text, so UI text, and I want this centered completely. So let's zero everything out. I want it aligned center in both, and we'll just call this Jimmy's Epic Quiz, because why not? That's the name of the game. I'm going to change the font to the font we imported, and I'm going to change the font size to probably 30, which means I do need to expand this a little more. So Jimmy's Epic Quiz. Now remember when we did some animations? Well, let's do another quick little animation with this one. So let's go to our animations folder, click on animation. Let's rename this text to be splash text. Let's click on create, and we'll have splash text anim, and this one is going to be real quick. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to start with it being 0 on the alpha. So we're in the first keyframe, remember, 0. Let's go to 60 frames, and let's set the alpha to the full 255. And then after another 60 frames, so in fact, let's go 2 seconds with this on screen. So let's go another 120 frames. So frame 180. Let's jiggle that around a bit and set it back to 255. And what that will do is it will make sure that no animation will occur between those two keyframes. So it will stay 255. Although it will animate, it will remain at 255 between those two keyframes. So let's go 1 extra second, so frame 240, and let's change the alpha to 0. So effectively what we've done is create a fade in and fade out effect. So if we press the record button, head to project, and then click on the splash text, let's untick loop time and press play. And we'll see that text fade in, wait for 2 seconds, and then fade out. So let's do the same thing with the white background. So let's go on splash image, click on animation, click on create, and we'll put splash back anim. I realise the term splashback is probably not the best thing to use there, but I guess it doesn't really matter. So let's press record again, and as always, we need to set that first keyframe. So we set the first keyframe as completely white. So alpha is going to be full 255. Now we need it to stay completely white until our splash text has disappeared. So after frame 240, let's fade out that white background. So frame 240, and let's set it back to 255, because remember, we don't want anything to animate between those two keyframes, so it will stay completely white. And then a second after that, another 60 frames, we want it to completely disappear. So we set the alpha as 0, and then it goes straight into the quiz. So let's press the record button to stop. And yeah, I know it looks a bit crazy there. We can see that's covering, but don't worry about it at all. Everything should turn out quite nice. So let's change that animation that we've just created and turn loop time off. And let's press play and see the animated sequence. Cool. So now let's take the sequence even further, because if you understand how Unity works, you'll know that at this point the quiz won't work, even though all we've done is just add 2 things, but it won't actually work because the problem is can't click. Reason being is because whatever is furthest down the list in the canvas is at the forefront of everything. It means that we're not able to click those buttons because this splash image is in the way. So we need to turn that off. So we're going to create a script which will flow the sequence from the absolute start, which is this, to playing the game. I'm going to turn off the BGM so it's quiet when it starts up, and then the music starts whenever we get into the game. So let's go to our scripts folder, right click, create, C# script. We'll call this one Splash 2 Game. And let's open that up in Visual Studio. So a couple of things we need to add here. First one is going to be the music variable. So public game object BGM semicolon. And although it is music we're dealing with, we've actually turned the game object itself off, not the music. So all we would need to do is turn the object back on. We don't need to theoretically worry about the music itself. It will automatically start. Next thing we need to do is declare a game object as a variable for the background. So splash, I'll call it splash white. And then the text itself. So public game object splash text semicolon. So this is going to be done via a coroutine because we're going to be controlling time to some degree. It means that we don't need update and we don't need the annotations, so they can disappear. So let's start by writing that coroutine. So I, a numerator, and we'll call this splash end. Open close bracket, open curly bracket. Now, the splash screen itself, the whole sequence lasts 300 frames, which is 5 seconds, but we want the music to start as soon as the white starts fading into the game. So we need to wait for 4 seconds first. So yield, return, new, wait 4 seconds, 4. After 4 seconds, we'll turn the music on. So bgm.setActive, true, semicolon. And then after another second, we can turn the white background off and the text. So yield, return, new, wait 4 seconds, and in brackets 1. And then we'll say splash text dot set active false, and then splash white also dot set active false, semicolon. And we then just need to start the coroutine from the void start section. So start coroutine, and in brackets splash end, open close bracket, semicolon, and save. And this will be the final script to get the whole game functioning. So let's head back into Unity. And let's place splash to game on the master control object up here. And just set those 3 variables. So BGM is going to be there, splash image is the white, and splash text right there. Let's make sure our scene is saved, and let's watch this whole sequence unfold. Cool, so everything is working as intended. And obviously you can change a couple of things to speed up the sequence. You know, it waits 2 seconds before it displays the next one. Like that. It's up to you how quick or how slow you want things to occur. So let's go to edit, and let's go to project settings. Now, over here you'll find a couple of different things, but because this game is so simple, you don't really need to worry too much about what we're dealing with here. It might be worth going through some of these, but again, it's not something that you would need to worry about too much with any of this. One thing that we are going to take a look at is the player. Now, the player is not you per se, it's the actual running of the game. So company name, it could be anything you want. My company, the product name, obviously quiz app, version, let's say version 1.1, whatever it would be. Your icon will be whatever you want it to be. You can drag and drop textures here if you want to. They would obviously feed down into all of these icons here. You can change the resolution if you want to. Splash image, it's not really relevant, I don't think, but it's worth noting that splash image and a splash screen are two completely separate things, by the way. They are completely separate. For example, we're building for PC here, as denoted right there. Basically, a splash screen is the introduction. So for free versions of Unity, you'll have like the Unity logo flash on the screen. That's technically a splash you could think of. But yeah, it's not quite the same as what we've created here. A couple of other settings if you're building for PC, but again, because of the simplicity of what we've created here, none of them are really relevant. You can build for UWP. Again, it functions the same as PC. It's the same kind of settings. Then you've got your iOS and Android. Probably worth noting just to make sure you have the correct SDKs installed, all that kind of stuff. But again, it's just the simple settings. Quality is another one you could probably look at. It's just a way of defining how good it looks. I mean, if you're creating a simple app like this, it's not really relevant most of the time. If you're creating a big, massive open world that you want to look fantastic, then yeah, it probably would matter. But when it comes to some of these settings, you don't need to worry about it too much at all. The main thing that you would want to do is test and play the game. And you would do that by going to File, Build Settings, and we went to this a long time ago, clicking Add Open Scenes to make sure it's in there, and then Build and Run to test. If you're on PC, Mac, and Linux, like I say, you would end up with a standalone executable to test, but I think testing is very important. So if you're at this point now and you're not sure what to do in terms of does your game work, does it not, where do you go from here? The best thing that I can recommend is if you build it for PC first, test it and make sure everything functions as normal. You can then also get it working functionally on a mobile device. You can, if you go through the package manager, find something that way to do it. If not, there are plenty of tutorials. I've even got tutorials on how you would do it. But all I can say at this point is test, test, test. Make sure your game is functional, it's working, no bugs. And if there are bugs, fix them. Easy. So, where do you go from here development-wise? Well, this series has been, about 2.5 hours? So it's very primitive. It's very simple. But if you are brand new to Unity and you've made it this far, then you've at least got yourself up to a better level than beginner. You've learned things and you can apply that knowledge to other things. I have loads, like I think I have over 1,000 tutorials now at this point on my channel of different things that you can build and create in Unity. Some things as simple as this, other things a bit more complex, other things more fun. So if you want to know where to go, you want to look at create new things, take a look at my playlists and just find something you want to do, whether it's survival horror, a racing game, a platform game, an endless runner, all kinds of stuff. Just give it a go. And hopefully, you've come this far and you have a nice quiz app. I'd love to see the end result of what some of you guys have created as well. And I hope I will see you in another one of my tutorials. So thank you very much for sticking with me for the past couple of hours, and I'll see you around. Thanks very much for watching, guys.